Welcome to the second episode of Tokyo Alumni Podcast. Today, our first guest from the Christian Academy Japan, CAJ. This individual graduated in 2004. He went on to Northwestern College to earn a degree in physical education. He then went to Framingham State University, where he earned a master's degree in international education. He's taught around the world in countries such as China, Venezuela, Czech Republic, and he currently resides in the United Arab Emirates. Today's guest is Nate Reasoner. Thank you for joining us today, Nate.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Nick. It's a real pleasure.
So there's a lot of things I want to talk to you about, but I think first, if I can ask you, not many people who go to international schools go on into teaching. Right? There's not many. And you decided to go into teaching. So what motivated you to go into teaching? And sort of a secondary question along that point is, how has your background going to Christian Academy Japan, or CAJ, impacted the way you teach or your teaching career in general?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess going back to the beginning of why I wanted to become a teacher, it's one of those cliche answers, but it kind of ran in my blood, I suppose. Both my parents were teachers at one point. My uncles, aunts, teaching in international schools as well, but also professors in universities in the States. And so I kind of saw that as a career path from the very beginning, going back to like primary school, just thinking that I would want to be a teacher and emulate my relatives. But then just specific, experiences that I had growing up with really good coaches, but also PE teachers. I think those are the people that I really wanted to become like, and that's why I guess I chose that career path of teaching, but also physical education in particular, to be that same mentor that I had as a PE teacher, but also as a coach. I guess with the second part of your question, CAJ, and how that impacts or influenced me, I guess going into the international scene, was it?
Yes.
Or how that was, yeah. I'm not sure if CAJ in particular influenced me to go international. I always knew I wasn't going to teach in the States. Like, that was very clear to me. After having studied and finished my undergraduate degree, like I had it in the back of my mind. I was always kind of thinking, I'm not going to teach in the States. I had to do my student teaching in the States. That was a given just to finish that credential. But as soon as I graduated, I flew back to Japan, like literally 3 days later. And I didn't teach right away. I actually taught English, just kind of bummed around for a bit. But actually, fun fact, it was in 2010, and I was visiting a friend who was completing his master's in Bangkok, the College of New Jersey, TCNJ, where I met you, actually. This is during the World Cup, 2010. But that's where I met you. And it was during that time where I was surrounded by like these people studying for their masters or just getting their teaching credential in this international setting. And it was very inspiring to me. And I actually signed up for the job fair. I signed up with International School Services, ISS, like the following month, because like, that's what I want to do. I want to teach internationally all over the world.
Yeah, and that was one hell of a World Cup.
We watched Japan get knocked out in that Paraguay penalty shootout, which is just a travesty, but we won't think about such negative things now.
Yeah, a full decade ago. Crazy. You earlier were saying you weren't going to teach in the States, and a lot of people say this who start international. So I was just wondering if you want to elaborate on that point. Why, so you said you did student teach there, but why was the States not really on the table as a possible option?
I think the main reason was this background we have, a lot of us share, especially maybe some of you listening who are going to international schools now, this idea, this term, third culture kid, TCK. That's actually, I wasn't really aware of it growing up, but it's something that's been very influential. It's been a factor in my life quite a bit, especially since leaving CAJ. Just kind of realizing I don't really belong in one place. When I was in Japan, I always felt more American, even though I'm half Japanese, half American. When I was in Japan, I felt more American because I wasn't really ingrained in Japanese culture. I don't speak Japanese that well. So I really felt American. But then when I was back in the States, I felt so Japanese, just being different, not having grown up in like one town, going to the same high school as everyone, and then moving. There's like that whole American experience. I didn't have that. I never experienced it. And so for me, it was very foreign, even though we went back to the States from time to time. I was familiar with that area. It wasn't home. It just felt so foreign, despite my passport being American. Like that's the whole conundrum of being like TCK. It's like you're home, but you don't feel like you're at home. And so for me, doing my student teaching, I'm like, I'm not going to stay here. Like this is just not for me. It's not exciting. I see like everyone kind of looking the same more or less, and it's not something I'm familiar with. So that was just in the back of my mind the whole time. Like I'm going back. Like I'm going back to the international scene. And at that time, I really wanted to go back to Japan.
And when you went to Bangkok in 2010, you met all these people at other schools. You went on to the fair, and then where did you go from there?
So I guess the story of going to the fairs is probably an interesting one to kind of get this story started. And it could be beneficial for some international school students who may be thinking of a career in international school teaching as well. I kind of heard through, I guess, just various sources. I think it was actually at that, during that summer in Bangkok, meeting those teachers, and they were recommending different organizations that can help you find a job. International School Services, or ISS, being one of them, Search Associates being another. So I had signed up with ISS. It was actually the cheaper one, so I just did that one. And I went back to Bangkok with for a job fair, which is, we can talk about that more later if we want, but I mean, that's just a crazy animal, like in its own right, just speed dating basically. But I mean, you're getting offers and interviews, and it's wild. But yeah, I'd signed up with ISS, went to the fair, was completely out of my league. Like that was the first fair in the recruiting season, and all the teachers there were pretty much teaching couples with no kids who had IB experience. And I was a fish out of water. Like I got a few interviews, but these directors and headmasters were just saying, we can't hire you. Like you're 23, no, I was 25 at the time. You're 25 years old. Like there's no way we can take you. But we want to interview you, give you some advice, give you some tips. Like, so it was very beneficial to still go through that experience. And it was at that fair where I was recommended to go to the University of Northern Iowa. They held a fair. So I attended a second fair that year, a month later, and that's where I got hired at an international school in Maracaibo, Venezuela.
Wow!
That was like that was the beginning of my journey. Yeah.
So you went to two fairs to get that first job, and you were saying earlier it's like speed dating. So maybe for someone who hasn't been to these international school fairs, how would you explain it? How does it work for one to get a job at these ISS and Search fairs?
So the two organizations, those are the two big ones, ISS and Search Associates. They hold fairs, they host fairs at different locations all over the world throughout the year. And there's some really big ones, like the ones in Bangkok, there's one in London, one in Cambridge, Boston. But the way it works is you sign up for one of them. So if you're registered with this organization, you can attend one of these fairs. And when you get there, you're basically just in contact with the schools that you're interested in. And all these schools have posted what positions are available. So for me, I'm a physical education teacher. I was looking at all the schools that had PE positions. And I can kind of look at which maybe locations I wanted to go to, or which schools were maybe, a really well-known, reputable school. I could target them and contact them prior to the fair. But then, like where it really got going was when the fair started. You basically just walk into like a banquet hall. All the tables are set up. Each of the schools has their own booth, and you just pretty much go with your CV in hand, do a quick intro of who you are, what you do. Can we set up an interview at some point this weekend? They'll say yes or no. And then it's kind of awkward from there, because then you get your list or get your schedule of interviews during that quick like hour or 2 hours of I guess like the fair sign up or the interview sign up time. And then from there you actually go to the hotel rooms of these directors and headmasters. It's all like there's no problem with that. It's just how it is. But then they just grill you for about half an hour. And you go through the ringer, they ask you a lot of questions. I think it's pretty stressful for the candidates, but I can also imagine just how stressful it is for the directors and headmasters trying to hire people, just trying to find the right candidates. But you go through many of these interviews, and maybe a second interview with the same school if they're pretty interested and they want more information. And then if you get to a third interview, that's probably where you're talking details of contracts and salary negotiations. And they'll ask you to sign right there during that weekend. And your life can change just like that, where you don't know where you're going. And then 48 hours later, you've signed a contract to go to Venezuela. But scary as it was really exciting. And I think it's probably one of the highlights of my teaching career is just kind of getting into that scene and starting off in that way.
Yeah, I hear about these fairs. I've actually, even though I've been in the teaching scene for a while, I've actually never been to these fairs. What I hear is that you get a contract and you have to respond within 24 hours, 48 hours, and you literally are having to choose between Saudi Arabia or Brazil, which is obviously life-changing. And I just find that fascinating, but also quite it's a moment where it does make me feel apprehensive to actually go to one of those fairs. And fortunately, I've made it this far not going. So
I'll add a quick little story for all the viewers out there. Mr. Nick Harris here ditched me, actually. Little fun fact. We were supposed to be roommates at the Boston Fair in 2014, I think. And then this guy gets hired at his present school in Korea and then left me high and dry to go by myself.
Yes, it's all my current employer's fault.
It's always good though to get those jobs. It's always good to get the job before the fair. Just save yourself the stress. Like you did it the right way. So I was just joking. But
yeah,
you got that job. No worries.
And earlier you also mentioned about IB experience. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the American school in Japan, so that's where I went to, was an AP school. On episode 1, we had Jeff from St. Mary's. That's an IB school. What kind of school was CAJ?
CAJ was also AP. So they had an American curriculum and then the advanced placement for the 11th and 12th grade years.
And earlier you said, a lot of teachers have this IB experience. It seems like a lot of schools out there are now IB, and you have experience with both. In a nutshell, I mean, how would you compare your experience with both of these type of education systems?
Yeah, I'll actually add a third one to the mix here. At one of my schools in the Czech Republic, I taught at a British international school. So I have a little bit of experience across 3 pretty different curricula. I guess just to quickly go over the differences, the American AP curriculum, it's not necessarily through an organization, even though the AP is through the college board. But basically, you're taking higher level classes and receiving college credit if you get high marks in those classes. Whereas the IB is an organization, like you don't have to be, but a lot of schools who are IB continuum schools, meaning they run the primary years program, the middle years program, and then the diploma program. You can go through their entire program, kind of going through the IB framework, if you want to call it that. But it is an organization that governs the entire thing. And you're kind of an IB student. And it's similar in the fact that when you're in the diploma program in the last 2 years, you can take these examinations, and then if your marks are high enough, you can get college credit for that as well. But I think the main differences between the American AP and the IB are that the American curriculum, I think, is a bit more broad, and now I wouldn't say general, but they cover a lot of content, and you can definitely specialize in different courses, like AP courses, if it's in history, for example, or maybe some sort of like physics or something like that. And the IB is similar, but if you're going to finish with an IB diploma, you have to take all their courses all the way through. You may want someone maybe want to correct me on that one, because I do teach in the lower, like I'm a primary years program teacher right now, so you can fact check me on that one. But the IB is definitely more of a conceptual curriculum, and I think it's really good for developing critical thinkers, problem solvers. They have a lot of jargon related to the IB, and it does help understand the framework, but it is kind of its own entity as well. And the third one, I guess, kind of adding that British curriculum as well. The experience that I had in that one, where it was a bit more prescribed, I believe they've taken out the levels. That was a big part of the curriculum. I believe they took that out, but it's still a bit more of a prescriptive curriculum, where you're hitting certain objectives and it's not necessarily mastery based, but when you hit that level, then you can move on to the next one. So there are definitely advantages to that one as well, where you're really mastering content and having, I guess, a really good understanding of the subject matter.
So you've taught in so many places, right? China, Venezuela, Czech Republic, United Arab Emirates. So of these places, where would you recommend someone who's maybe currently job hunting, who's an international teacher, what parts of the world would you recommend, why, and maybe some parts you would not recommend for whatever reasons?
Yeah. I think it depends on what you're looking for as a teacher. I've met teachers who have had, it seems like the dream career where they've gotten jobs in schools just like Milan, Singapore, Munich. Like it was like a who's who list of what's like just getting into the best schools. But I think there is something about going to different countries and really expanding your horizons. I would say if someone's looking to get into teaching, and international teaching in particular, like I said before, it depends on what you're looking for. For me, for example, I went to Venezuela first, and that was an invaluable experience because it was a culture completely different to anything that I knew with growing up in Japan, but also the United States. Very different from both. So I learned a lot from a cultural perspective, but it was also a smaller school, and that was something to take into consideration, or something to take into consideration as well, is I had opportunities to do so many different things in the school, not just be a PE teacher, but do middle school student council and coach, and eventually I took over the head of the department, even at a young age. There's just a lot of opportunities in a smaller school. So that's something to consider wherever you are in the world. If it's a really established school, there may not be those opportunities, but maybe you go to one of these smaller schools somewhere else in the world, like there are definitely opportunities. You grow really quickly having those maybe leadership positions or just opportunities that you may not get elsewhere. But if you're looking at other areas in the world, like for example, I'm currently in Dubai, and Dubai is saturated with international schools. Like if you really wanted to find a job, you could probably find a job here. But with that being said, like you're going to have a huge mix of British, American, IB, and you're going to be going up against probably people like, this is where everyone's coming, it seems, these days. So it's a great place to live, great place to work, but it is definitely a competitive market. So you want to be looking at, like get a feel for what's happening in the world. Like right now, I think Dubai is attracting a lot of teachers. So you may want to look elsewhere. We could go into the finances of probably, maybe it's not best to talk about money on the show, but thinking about what packages are offered from schools, whether housing is offered from by the school, whether they take care of your insurance, flights. There's a lot of different things. There's a lot of benefits to teaching internationally. And it's good to weigh those options, weigh the packages that schools offer.
Well, I think actually the topic of money is one that probably people are interested in, because people are interested in money, generally speaking. And it kind of goes back to actually a question I failed to ask earlier. But I think part of the reason why a lot of people who do graduate international schools don't go into teaching is because it's generally not a lucrative industry. At least from what I don't know any teachers who are, driving Bentleys. At least if there are any, I assume their spouse probably is the one who bought the Bentley. So going along those lines, was that ever a factor for you going into teaching, like knowing that the money was not going to be perhaps, quite the same as other occupations?
I would actually say quite the opposite. Like I think I knew I wanted to be a teacher from a young age, and then it was a matter of where. I already knew I didn't want to teach in the States. And from what I understand, teaching in America or teaching in the United States is definitely not a lucrative occupation to go into. However, I would say that international school teaching can be quite lucrative, and it seems kind of crazy, but I mean, compared to a finance job or you're working in some other sort of like finance industry, if that was like banking or whatnot, like, yeah, you're not going to be making those kinds of figures. However, in education, teaching in an international school is really good. because a lot of times the school will take care of your housing. Like they'll give you an accommodation or housing allowance. They will fly you to and from your home or your point of origin every summer. Insurance is covered. There are other different stipends that you receive in addition to a pretty good salary. And a lot of times, like for example, where I am currently, it's tax-free. So if you're from a country where you're not double taxed, like if they don't have that, if there's an agreement where you're not double taxed, like you can be saving quite a bit of money and living a very comfortable lifestyle. So I think for some students who may be considering going into international teaching or just going to teaching in general, and you're concerned about the financial aspect of it, I wouldn't worry about it necessarily with international school teaching. But with that being said, things are changing, and the packages that, even I think maybe you and I, Nick, were looking at the beginning of our career are not there anymore. And definitely 20, 30 years back, that golden age of international school packages, I think is not there anymore. But it's still a very good option, I think, for those interested in going into education.
That's a great point, that it is very stable. And as you referred to, even though the market, so that especially with the big schools, sort of those golden packages are gone, something of the past. Overall, it is comparatively, I guess, teaching in the United States or Japan, definitely the lifestyle is a little bit better and the packages are definitely slightly more lucrative. When you lived in Venezuela, that was 2014. I remember a lot was happening then. Briefly corresponded during that period. What was it like being in Venezuela? I believe that was probably about a year after the elections, the controversial elections in 2013.
Yes, it was very wild at that time. Like just going, 2013, the controversial election where Chavez got reelected. A lot of teachers and families actually left the country at that time because they just didn't see hope for Venezuela. And maybe it was prophetic in some way because the following year, inflation went up and it was just, it was very difficult to get basic necessities in the country. And it's very tragic. Just looking at the situation even now, not much has changed. But that was when it really kind of kicked off, was in 2014. So that was my last year teaching in Venezuela. And towards the end there, I think it was right before spring break or somewhere in March, April, where we actually had about 2 weeks where we weren't, I think we had half days, or even we didn't even go to school because there's a lot of protests in the streets. There's something called guarimbas that were being set up where people would wake up really early in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning before people went to work. They put a bunch of trash and different things out blocking the streets, set them on fire, so that it was a protest that, we're going to shut the city down. We're not going to let people get to work. And this is going to be our protest. And these are the people protesting against the Chavista, like the government that was in place, saying, we're not going to go to work, or we're not going to let anyone else go to work. That lasted for probably 2 weeks or so. But it was just looking out my window, you see this guarimba set out in front of the street, barbed wire, fire, it felt like something out of a movie. And you feel like, and there are times when you feel like your life may be in danger, or do we need to evacuate? At the same time, this is daily life for people in those countries. And it was a very interesting experience to go through that with the people of the international school students, who were in my school, but also the parents, my neighbors, something we probably never experienced in Japan. Maybe not in the States, but it was definitely a different experience for sure, but a very kind of a valuable one. There are other things happening in the world, and to have that firsthand experience was very interesting.
And then when you lived in places like China, the Czech Republic, were things, I imagine they weren't quite as wild as they were in Venezuela, or did those countries also have sort of their own obstacles that you had to overcome, living there?
I think, when you mentioned obstacles, every country you move to, if it's not an English-speaking one or a Japanese-speaking one, and you don't speak the language, it's going to be difficult. Moving to China, yes, it is becoming more international, more Western in a way, and people are speaking English. However, operating in a city where Chinese is the main language and you don't speak Chinese. Like it's difficult. So I think those are the biggest barriers with language. Czech Republic was the same way, where I mean, Czech is the official language. English is widely spoken, but it's just not as easy as maybe living in the States or living in Japan compared to what we're used to, I suppose. But again, those are opportunities for growth, for learning, just experiencing those different cultures. It may not be wild, it may not be crazy like it was in Venezuela at that time, but you go in and you're so excited to be there, and after a while it can get kind of heavy, and it's difficult sometimes just to go to the bank and set up a bank account. But it's all part of the process. And looking back, like those are always the things that you kind of like, oh, that was kind of cool, like having gone through daily life, shall we say, in a country that you probably wouldn't have guessed or you wouldn't have imagined yourself living in 15, 20 years ago. Like it's a pretty cool thing to have gone and lived in so many different places despite certain barriers or obstacles.
Yeah, the way it's like living an adventure. This definitely makes international teaching definitely an exciting endeavor for some of us. Although I don't know about having to live through the what was it called, Guandebas, the Venezuelan
Guarimbas.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to live through the Guarimbas, but I do agree with that notion that it's like living in an adventure. I remember my first morning in Bahrain, waking up to the prayers. I've never lived in an Arab country, so that was already surreal, waking up in the hotel room like 5 a.m. thinking, what is going on? And it's the prayers, and I'm thinking, oh, I guess this is the new normal, at least for the upcoming year.
If you don't mind me asking, sorry, just to cut in here, if you don't mind me asking, because we're both in the same field, what have been some of your most memorable experiences? Because we've actually had very similar trajectories in our career, where you started off, I think, in Bahrain, you said, right? Middle East.
Correct, yeah.
And then you were in Honduras. Yeah, then you're in Honduras, and then now Korea.
Yeah,
so that's three continents, or three pretty different areas of the world. Like, what were some of your most memorable experiences, like good or bad?
I agree with what you said earlier about, obviously everything's nuanced, but especially in the field of education and teaching, where you are in your career really makes a big difference. And when I was in Honduras, I mean, the whole faculty, the foreign faculty at least, were basically in their 20s. So that had obvious benefits and obvious negative points, because there was no one with real experience, but at the same time it felt really like we were building the school together. Everyone was in it together. There was less of there was less tradition, which I know in a weird way, like the school did of course have a lot of traditions, but what I mean is that when it came to things like academically, people are always willing to try new things out, because a lot of people were new to the school and administration was relatively new as well. So people were a lot more open to new ideas. Whereas I feel like the more prestigious the school becomes, things just become more constrained in regards to creativity and what kind of new things schools can do. In regards to memories, when I was in Bahrain, I was actually there during the Arab Spring. So I did have some students who were arrested and they never returned. That was definitely a memory, definitely not a good one, but definitely something that's stayed with me throughout the years. The Shia students, some of them were arrested and they basically never returned. And in Honduras, just living there, this is actually not a joke. The 6 months before I was going to Honduras, I think it was the United Nations, the World Bank, some global entity, some sort of, or as an NGO, MPO in the world, rates the most dangerous city in the world each year. So for a while, Somalia's Mogadishu kept this #1 position. And 6 months before I was heading over to San Pedro Sula, Honduras, San Pedro Sula took over Mogadishu. So I remember emailing my administrator, like each week I'd see updates and the murder rate keep going up. I was like, is this place okay? Like they're saying it's worse in Mogadishu. And they're like, that's all right. And I got there and it was a steep learning curve. Like we had bodyguards, like not one-on-one bodyguards, but we'd have multiple people protecting where we live with pretty big guns. And you can hear gunshots at night. So just getting through that definitely was a new experience for me as well. So in Korea, I've spent most of my career here as a teacher. Actually, majority of my years have been in South Korea. It's in Jeju. I really enjoy this country. I enjoy the island. I like the school I teach at. When I think of episodes that stick out, God, so many years here, so it's hard to pick one. But I think what would stick out the most for me, meeting my wife. So actually, I met my wife at my school. It was orientation, maybe the second, third day, and I think I asked her out maybe the fifth day, and that was about 6 years ago now. So we dated for a while, and then we got married about a year ago. So that's probably been the greatest. I don't know if you call that a surprise, but that's been the biggest takeaway from Korea for me in the past 6 years. So this podcast is not about me, though. It is about the guests. So I want to swing this back to you at the very end as we close this podcast down. What would you want the listener to know about international education?
So yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me on, Nick. It's really good to catch up after all these years, and also kind of, as you're asking me questions, to reflect on my own career at this point. But to leave the listener with just a little, last little bit here about international education, I guess to kind of condense my philosophy of education down to just a few sentences, I would say it's not necessarily about the subject matter in particular. Of course it is. You want to gain knowledge, but I really think the school experience is about getting as many tools as possible and having as many experiences as possible so that you can really take those and use them later in your life. And so I think, both of us, we grew up in international schools, and those experiences were invaluable as we went through university, and then now we're in our careers. And we continued on in international teaching. And so for the listener here who's probably going to an international school right now, I just want to say you're in a very, unique but very positive environment right now to really get those tools. The world is becoming much more global, much more connected. And I've always thought that, whether you're half Japanese, half American, or half anything really, you have that perspective. But also just, even if you're from one country, but growing up in the international school setting, you'll meet so many different people. You'll gain so many tools of how to interact with different people, especially just diverse backgrounds. So I think it is such a positive thing to go to international schools. And I've been very fortunate to continue to work in this environment. And I'll just think, just the resources that are out there now, growing up, our jidai, our era, there wasn't really social media. I kind of knew some students from ASIJ, I sort of knew some students from St. Mary's, but not like it did. My first year of university, that's when Facebook actually came out. And now it's just such a main component of our lives. But that's where I really think things like this podcast, even really beneficial, where we're connecting people with shared similar experiences and see what we're doing, see what we're up to, but just the networking opportunities as well. There have been countless encounters that I've had with other international school students, some from Japan, but others from around the world. And you have that bond. And there's that saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. It can actually, it's a real thing. Networking opportunities are invaluable. I would say, embrace the experience that you're having now. If you are a student, if you were a student, I hope that you can reflect or look back on it as a positive experience, because I think we were really fortunate to have been given these opportunities.
Well, that was Nate Reasoner. Thank you for being on the second episode of the Tokyo Alumni Podcast. I really appreciate you coming on and spending your time. I guess you're zooming in from Dubai, and I guess it's still the afternoon over there. So
yeah, you probably could tell the light was changing. It's just it's 4:30 here in the afternoon, and it is hot.
Yeah, I imagine June in Dubai sounds quite hot. How hot does it get there?
Right now it's about 40 degrees with 90% humidity. It's ridiculous. But it'll go up to 40, 50 degrees.
50 degrees. Wow. That is
50 degrees.
quite unreal. So I hopefully your AC is working, and it's still 4:30 over there. So I hope you have a good afternoon. Over here in Korea, it's night. So I'll go ahead and get into editing. And again, thank you so much for being on the show.
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. It was great.